Okay, I'm going to do an overview of Lucidlink, which is something that you've heard me talk about over and over again for the past year since the pandemic started. Lucidlink is, I think, one of the most promising remote workflow technologies that exist now. And it's for how well it works, it's remarkably inexpensive and easy to use. So I'm going to just kind of do a run through of how it works. So hopefully we can all get up to speed in using it. As you can see, their website proclaims themselves to be the Cloud NAS, which normally sounds like marketing bullshit, but I can attest that it's true. It's not going to be the same like working locally on an Evo NAS or any other NAS on a 10 gigabit local Ethernet network. But as far as balancing the trade-offs of convenience versus performance and cost, it kind of hits the sweet spot of all those things. So you can work with huge files. It's cheap to use, easy to use, and it gives you a lot more flexibility with remote workflows. So you're not having to constantly shuttle physical hard drives back and forth just for doing offline edits or just to do simple editing tasks or even conforming or anything like that. So the idea is that instead of having a local NAS server, you dump your footage to the Lucidlink cloud servers and you download the Lucidlink software and mount the NAS, quote unquote, cloud NAS, on your local system, just like any other local disk, except you're pulling the media from the cloud. So obviously this is dependent on you having fairly decent internet and stable internet and preferably wired internet, like using an Ethernet connection to your router versus Wi-Fi. Although it does work with Wi-Fi, it's just more reliable performance unwired. But as long as you have that, for most stuff, you can get away with using this, and it's kind of amazing. So let's just get into the download and install process. So click download the Lucid client. All right, so download it. Let's install it. Just accept all the defaults. Okay, so after you install it, it's going to launch itself automatically. And it's going to ask you to connect to a file space. So a file space is the equivalent of a local network mount. So like if you mounted Projects Evo or Daily's Evo, One Evo on the local NAS, this is the equivalent of that. So you want to connect to a pre-existing file space name, or you can create a new one. I've already created one. And all the file spaces in Lucidlink have to be unique. So you can't just type wedding video because somebody probably already used it. So you want to create a pretty unique file space name. And one of the conventions they use is to use this like a domain name style naming system where you start specific and then get more general, kind of like, blah, blah, blah.com. So I've already created one called lucidlink.blinkworks. Okay, so that would be our unique file space. Hit continue. Now it asks for a username. So Lucidlink is a multi-user system within your own account. So I believe our plan that we're using right now allows us to have 5 users. So you can actually add new users. Like if you have a collaborator that you wanted just to give them access to a specific folder of media, just so they can maybe transcribe it or make notes or whatever. Or even a client, if you want them to look at dailies or something, you can create an account for them. They can do the same process what we're doing here, install the software, and then mount the media locally. Okay, so if you open up your 1Password and search for Lucidlink BW, there's individual users. So just pick the one, obviously, that applies to you, and then use that as the login credentials for this file space. And click Remember Password. Okay, open the folder. So now what you see in your sidebar here, you see a little volume called Lucidlink. Okay, and as you can see here, I have a folder called SLFH, which is, I just uploaded a bunch of test media for this demo, and that's the lantern floating footage. You can see that Finder says that there's 251 gigabytes of media in this folder, but this does not. None of this exists locally on your system. What you're seeing is a mounted Lucidlink network volume that's hosted on Lucidlink's IBM cloud storage servers somewhere in California. but it's appearing as if it's locally attached, or if you connect it to a local NAS. So everything that applies to a local NAS applies here pretty much. You work with it just like any other file or folder in the Finder. Okay, so let's do something to show how Lucidlink works. Let's go find a piece of footage, big piece of footage maybe. Here's a piece of footage. It's 41 gigabytes. So if I double click on that to open up in my default video player, it opens up instantly. If I go here to the middle of the file, it skips to the middle of the file. If I play, it plays. And if I go to the end of the file, I hit play, and it plays. Let's go back to the beginning of it. Hit play, and then it plays. So as you can see, I can access this file without having to download all 41 gigabytes first. And that's thanks to the Lucidlink object streaming technology, as they call it. It just sends the media to your computer in a different way than a standard NAS would, network volume like a NAS share would do it. So you can find another clip, same deal. And then if you load that up and hit play, it plays. Okay, so it's actually, you're seeing the actual file. This is not some weird video streaming proxy kind of thing. It's the legitimate file that's getting sent to your computer. And it plays. Okay, so that's pretty cool. Okay, I'm going to show what happens when you copy a file into the Lucidlink file space on your side and what it looks like to other people who are also connected to that same Lucidlink share. So what I got here is in this Finder window is my local computer connected to the Lucidlink share. And in this window, I have my MacBook Pro, which is also connected to the same Lucidlink file space. So you can see that they're the same. One interesting thing to note is that Lucidlink will even synchronize what's called the extended attributes of a folder or file, which includes things like colored folder labels. So I gave this a green color, and it's actually showing up on the other Lucidlink system with the same label. So that's kind of a neat thing. Okay, but what we really want to see is what happens when we copy a bunch of files into the Lucidlink file space in the cloud, what that looks like on the other side. So I've got a bunch of files here, totaling about 1.5 gigs. So let's just copy that right into the file space. Look what's happening on the remote system. So you can pretend that this system is a collaborator thousands of miles away. They're just connected to the same Lucidlink share. But instantaneously, they see that the files are added to the Lucidlink share on my end. So this 1.5 gig, it could just as well be 20 gigs of data. They'll still see that these files are there. And as you can see here, look, you can see that some of these files are showing as 0 bytes, but you can see the file sizes are incrementing. I mean, it'd be nice if there was a more clear indicator like Dropbox or whatever that shows that this file is currently being synced. But what is an important thing to note is that what you're seeing here does not mean that these files are syncing back to this MacBook Pro computer. All this is doing is telling you, maybe a better way to say it is, what this is showing is how much data is actually on the Lucidlink file space up in the cloud. This is not how much data has been moved to your computer locally. So that's the reason why it was showing you incrementing file sizes, because it was in the process of being uploaded. And you're able to just, if you did this on a NAS, you would see the same thing on a regular NAS. So let's try it again. So watch the file sizes increment. See, and that corresponds to this. So really, if you tried to do a quick look on this file, for example, nothing would happen because the data isn't fully uploaded to the Lucidlink file space yet. Although the file name is, So it's kind of interesting that it shows you that information. But you can see here, this one is fully uploaded to the file space. So I can do a quick look and it's there. So anytime you see something with 0 byte, it probably means that it's currently being copied. And obviously you can see it, the file size is changing. So that's a good sign that that file is being uploaded. So if you ever have issues with files not opening, just keep an eye out on the file size because it could very well be in transit. So that's actually one of the coolest things about Lucidlink. It's kind of miraculous because it almost feels like you're moving hundreds of gigabytes of data instantaneously. And you're not really doing that, obviously. It's just giving you it's just giving the impression that that's what's happening. Because as long as your upload pipe to the file space is really fast and things get uploaded to that file space really fast, everybody else is connected to the Lucidlink file share will be able to immediately access that whenever they want without having to download it first. So that's kind of a cool thing. So now that I've shown you basically what Lucidlink does, we need to actually configure the Lucid app a little bit further in order to optimize it for a video post-production workflow. So we go over to this side of the screen where the menu bar icons are. If you click on this little 3-ring icon, the Lucidlink icon, and click on this little icon that looks like an EQ, that's the control panel settings. You want to open up the control panel, and right here you'll see all the local settings. This only applies to your computer. Let's look at some of these settings here. So mount point is what we saw in the Finder there. That would be the name that would show up mounted. So that's just like any other hard drive or something you format. You would format it with the name and it shows up in the sidebar. I like to keep it at the default just as a reminder that this is a special volume that isn't really a locally attached volume. So I almost like having that name in there just as a reminder that this should not be treated like a local drive. And there are considerations that you have to take into account, such as backups and fault tolerance for project files and all that kind of stuff. You have to be a little more careful for that kind of thing, knowing that the actual media is not on your local computer. It's all on the cloud. So that's why I like to keep it at the default. Root point, keep default. So the two big important things in the Lucidlink system is the cache. So just like Adobe Premiere and After Effects and any other app that renders files or that converts files for you behind the scenes, there is a local cache. So in Lucidlink, this cache defaults to your home folder, and it's an invisible folder. So if you go Command-Shift-, which shows all the hidden files in the Finder, you can see this folder here. It's a little grayed out here, but it's a hidden folder called .lucid. So that's the default where it'll write cache files by default, but you don't want to use your home folder on your system drive for cache files, especially if cache files are going to be as huge as video files. So the first thing you need to do is move that cache file to another location on your system that is both fast and large, just like any other cache folder you might create for Premiere or anything like that. Same rules apply for Lucidlink. So on my system, I have this big RAID here, this 18 terabyte RAID. I have a folder called caches, and I have cache folders for every other app I use that uses cache folders, and I pointed there too. Let's create a new folder here called Lucidlink, and that'll be my new cache folder. So this is the RAID cache folder and then Lucidlink. Okay, so you want to tell Lucidlink where that new cache is. So unfortunately, as of the version of Lucidlink I'm recording this with, 1.25, there's no file requester to find the folder that you want to use its cache location. So you actually have to type that path in manually. And apparently they're going to change that. They know that that's kind of dumb, but at least for now, you have to do that. So what I'm going to do here is go back to that cache folder, right click on the Lucidlink folder, and then hold the Option key down, which turns copy into copy as path name. Copy that, and then paste it in, and then click check. So it'll say file space reconnect required, but we're not going to do that right now. We'll do that after we deal with all these other settings. The other important setting, obviously, is the cache size. So the default Lucidlink cache size is 5 gigabytes, and that's the default when the cache was on your home folder. Obviously, 5 gigabytes is super small for video production workflows. And I think that default 5 gigabyte is a vestige of before, because Lucidlink has been around for a long time before the pandemic, and video production people like me figured out, hey, you can use Lucidlink for this stuff. It was mostly geared towards businesses and enterprise stuff for distributed documents and things like that. So 5 gigabyte cache was actually okay for that. But for video production, it's just not going to work. So you need to up this to something really big. In my case, I put 5 terabytes as the cache size. So you want to, just like any cache thing, you want to allocate as much space as you can. So if you've got a big hard drive, just give it that much space. Obviously, the smaller your cache drive, the less cache you can afford to give that app. So if you don't have a big cache drive or SSD or something, I would recommend getting one. Okay, so set that to 5 terabytes. For ProRes, if you're working with ProRes proxies over Lucidlink, that's very generous. It'll take you a long time to fill that cache up, but that ensures that you'll never run out of cache. And we'll talk about why that's so important with Lucidlink, just the way it works. It's super important why you need that local cache. These download rate options are for the network speed settings. So if you've got, like in my case, I have a gigabit download and 300 megabits up limit on my internet connection. When this thing says unlimited, Lucidlink will try as much as possible to saturate that internet pipe as much as possible, even if you're just pulling down one file. So maybe we can take a look at how that works. So up here in the menu bar here, I've got my iStat menu thing that shows network speed. So the top number means the speed of my current upload, and the bottom shows how fast things are coming into my computer as a download. So if I open up this ProRes file, and actually before I do that, let's open this up in Advisor and look for the bit rate. So the bit rate of this file is 141 megabits per second. Okay. And again, my internet download speed is gigabit, which is 1000 megabits. Okay. But theoretically, all you need is 141 megabits to play that ProRes file off the internet in real time. Okay, so let's open up this file. See what's happening here. I'm not even playing it. Let's go to the middle part of it. Hit play. See, you can see the download speed is now 370. It kind of fluctuates, but probably because it cached before I was even able to play it, because my internet connection is thankfully fast enough. But you can see, even though this is a 141 megabit per second file, it maxed out my internet connection as much as possible, because what I was doing, if let's say I put the playhead here, it's going to try to cache everything around it. And Lucidlink, that's what Lucidlink is good at. It intelligently caches media that it thinks you're going to want to see. So in the case of a video file, it's going to assume that, well, if you put the cursor there or the playhead there, you're probably going to want to see whatever is immediately around it instantly. So it'll spend as much network resources to try to get these frames cached as much as possible. And then maybe later down here, it'll kind of ease up on the internet connection. It'll still try to cache these files, intelligently cache it, but it won't expend as much network speed to do so, because you're still over here. So it's kind of an intelligent caching system. So that really works well. So by the time you hit play, and by the time the playhead gets to this part of the movie, Lucidlink has already cached it to the local drive. So this thing is playing in real time. Well, let's try another file. Let's try this. This is the physically different file, different version of this spot. I'll just go here. So I went to the middle of the file and it just played and started playing instantaneously. Actually, another good example, maybe if we look at a file that might have even more data, like this one is a 14. Well, let's look at this one, 41 gigabytes. It's a 41 gigabyte ProRes proxy file. Let's open it up. See, it shows up instantly. Let's go to the middle of the file and then hit play. So it plays. Let's go to the end of the file. Hit play. Let's go over here and hit play. So even though that's a 41 gigabyte file, it didn't have to download the entire damn file before it could even show you a frame, let alone play it. So you can see there's a little bit of a lag when I hit space. That's just the inherent latency of the internet and any number of factors. But the performance might actually be better if you're in California or something. But because the packets have to go over the Pacific Ocean and come back to us, there is more of a latency that you might experience if you're closer to the servers, the cloud server. But all things considered, that's tolerable. I mean, it's a second after you hit spacebar and it plays. So that's the promise of Lucidlink, right? But that's the reason why the download rate settings are important, and they default to unlimited because they want to make sure that you have the best performance. Where you might want to change this is if you need to maybe like be on a Zoom call at the same time you're using Lucidlink, editing actively off of a Lucidlink share. What you don't want to have happen is you're on a video chat on your network and you hit play and Lucidlink saturates your download bandwidth. And that's going to make your video chats get all stuttery and all that kind of thing. You'll see a bunch of demos that people have done on YouTube where they'll do like they're doing a live webinar or a live stream of Lucidlink, and they all turn this on and set it to a slower, they throttle the download rate just so they can do the live stream on YouTube, because otherwise they would never be able to do it. And it still works well. It's just maybe not as well as if you just let it take the whole damn pipe, but effectively there's not much difference. So keep that in mind if you ever need to do that. That's why these are here. But leave that unlimited is fine for any other case. Data compression, I'm still unsure of when it comes to video, because video is inherently compressed. So I'm not sure whether having that turned on affects performance. My assumption usually is if something's compressed, don't waste CPU cycles trying to compress it again. So my inclination was to turn it off. But I don't know. Every Premiere workflow demo I see in Lucidlink they never mention turning this thing off. This is always on, and I've never seen anybody say, you got to turn that off for a video. So maybe it's smart enough to know not to compress QuickTimes or whatever. So I just leave it off or leave it on, and it seems to work. And it may be compressing metadata, things like that. Who knows? But you can probably leave that on. Everything else, leave that. Update notifications you want to leave on because they tend to update this app quite frequently. So you want to be notified when new versions come out. Okay, now that we've gone through all those settings, now we can reconnect the file space. So it's going to reconnect. It's going to regenerate the cache location and all that kind of stuff. So hit reconnect and hit apply. Okay, so now the Lucidlink is back. Let's open up a Premiere project, see what happens. So here, let's open this project up. Okay. Before we do anything, first thing in Premiere or any app that may need to generate audio waveforms, you want to go into the preferences, go to audio, and then go to audio and make sure this automatic audio waveform generation is turned off. If you leave that on, what Premiere is going to do, because it doesn't even know that this media exists on a Lucidlink share, it's just going to try to download the video file just so it can generate the waveforms embedded in the file, which you don't want to do, obviously, because you're defeating the purpose of using Lucidlink at that point. If you're just going to download everything at once, there's no point in doing it that way. So you got to turn that off so you can prevent that. You might see that might be, you might think that that's a limitation, and I guess it is a limitation. I mean, you can still go on a clip-by-clip basis, and in the timeline, you can have your show audio waveforms, and it'll generate the waveform just for that little area there. So, but as you can see right now, what I'm doing is so I got the timeline here. Oh, and also what I did was enable the show dropped frame indicator over here, just so we can see what happens. So you're going to get drop frames. I'm not going to pretend that this is completely flawless, but you'll be surprised at how well it maintains. So I'll hit play. It starts playing. Turn off transmit. Go to here. Starts playing. So just like we did in the demo where I just kind of opened it up in video player and hit play and scrubbed, I just moved the playhead. Same thing in Premiere. So you can see that if I drop the playhead here, there's a little bit of a lag between the time I actually click on it and the frame shows up, but it's pretty quick. So I would say, as far as setting your expectations of this, don't expect that this is going to be like editing off of a local drive as far as performance goes. I would say that Lucidlink, at least right now, is good for doing rough cuts or reviewing footage, making notes of stuff, transcriptions, whatever. Stuff does not require that. If I click that, it has to show up immediately. If I tap the J key, it should start shuttling immediately. Lucidlink is great, but it's not. You're going to be disappointed if you're expecting that. So as long as you keep those expectations clear, I think you'll find that this is pretty tolerable in terms of that latency. But the whole caching system is where you may find relief in that, because as I scrub the playhead around, if I see it, it means it's getting cached. So why don't we go look at the cache folder we created here in Lucidlink. And the Lucidlink cache folder is invisible. So you need to use that Command-Shift period trick in Finder to show invisible files. So you can see their cache. So this is where all the cached frames are being stored here. So if it doesn't currently exist in a cache and you hit play, Lucidlink will stream it from the cloud share. But once it hits your computer, it writes those blocks of data to this cache folder. So you'll never have to go back to the cloud again to view those frames again if you wanted to. So, if I played this clip all the way through the entirety of what you see in the timeline, see, you can see this yellow dot because it's dropping here and there. But let's move this over here. So you can see we're getting a green line here. If you look at my download speed, though, nothing's happening. The reason why that's happening is because all these frames, it's playing now, it's pulling from the local cache. So it doesn't have to go back out to the internet. So now you can see it's doing something. It's either these frames weren't cached and now it's pulling it down from the cache, or it's intelligently kind of thinking, oh, it looks like he's eventually going to want to see these frames, so I should probably cache these files too before the playhead gets there. It could be that. It's an intelligent caching system. So you never know what it's doing, but it kind of does the right thing. So you see there, you've got a green dot and it's playing. And I didn't have to download any of this stuff. It's just playing straight from the cloud. It's the same deal here. So you can see that there's a second, maybe a second and a half of when I hit the space bar and the thing actually plays. But then once you do that, if I go back here and hit play again, it plays instantaneously again. So the more you work with a project, the more media you're kind of scrubbing through playing, the better the performance overall of the project will be, because eventually all these frames are still going to be stored in the cache. And that's obviously the reason why you need a big cache drive and a fast cache drive. Because if it can pull data from the internet only once, then it's great. It may only suck for the first few moments when you're pulling in a file that currently doesn't exist in the cache. But if it's ProRes proxy, it's tolerable. Okay, so one thing that's interesting about Lucidlink is because it's obviously this Lucidlink share exists in the cloud. What happens if you write stuff to this share, right? You might think that, if this exists in the cloud, if I write a new big file to this folder, it's going to take freaking forever. If I have a 20 megabit limit on my uploads, I'll have to sit there forever waiting for it to write. And I found out that used to be true, I think, at one point. Back when I demoed this last year, when the pandemic started, I think I noticed that was an issue. But when I just tried it now. I can show you that that's no longer the case. So if you go to, just find a big file. Okay, I'll use this file, 2 GB file. Okay. So I'll copy this over to the Lucidlink share. Okay, let's move over to the side of the screen so we can see what happens. So it's copying over to there. And it's copying, with fairly respectable speed. Oh, this is copying from one of my, I think my slow external drive. So there, it's there now. Now what you can see is my upload is maxed out. I have a 300 megabit per second upload cap or speed cap, and it's completely saturating the upload because what it's doing is now it's writing this file back up to the Lucidlink cloud share. And if you go over here, let's turn the cache back on. Now you can see the cache is 4.96 gigabytes. So conceptually, what's happening is whenever you write something to the Lucidlink, this share, what you're kind of really doing underneath the hood is you're technically writing it to this cache folder. So this software running in the background is obviously doing the housekeeping, remapping on the fly. Like, okay, he's writing to Lucidlink, so that means I'll cache those blocks of that data into this cache. And then after it's finished copying in the background, I'll write those blocks of data back up to the cloud. And you don't have to do anything. This all happens automatically. So that's why it can give you the impression that you're writing back to the cloud at local speeds. Although it's really not. For you, it looks like that. And that's kind of what's important. You don't want to experience slow performance when you're writing things to the Lucidlink share. You want it to act like just like any other drive on your system. That's what's pretty awesome of it. That's why it's so easy to use and transparent. You don't have to manage any of this stuff. Aside from the initial settings you did back, when we set the cache locations and all that stuff. So that's super awesome. You just set it and forget it. Okay, so here's a little kind of a test timeline I made just with 2 clips. But these are clips from the Lucidlink share. I'm playing it. So let's just pretend that this was the edited cut of the spot. And we watched it linearly. We just hit play and watched it through. As you can see, it's playing every single frame. Everything's cached. So then what happens if we send that sequence out to another app like DaVinci Resolve? Okay, so here we are in Resolve. Let's import that timeline. Okay, so there it is. So hit play. And it's playing with full frame rate. No drop frames. And as you can see, no download speed. So what this shows is that the Lucidlink caching system, Lucidlink, anything you put in a Lucidlink share is application agnostic. If you cache a media clip in Premiere, Resolve will read the same cache files that Lucidlink cached when you played the clip in Premiere. And it's immediately available to other apps. So in the case of Resolve, the fact that I've played these clips in Premiere means that they will also instantaneously play in Resolve without going back out to the internet. So that's an important concept to grasp with Lucidlink, is that it's just a file system, a network file system. So it is completely independent of any application you use the media in. So as long as it's being pulled down and cached, any app that you load that same file in will be also read from the cache. So I'll show you another feature of Lucidlink that may be helpful in certain situations. Let's find some proxies here. Okay, let's just say for the sake of argument that we know for a fact that we want to be able to see every single frame of all of these files immediately. We know we want to load them up from the first frame, play them through all the way through, and watch them without any interruptions. So normally what you do is you want to just download them and load them up. Thankfully, Lucidlink gives you that option. If you right click on it, there's this option in the context menu called pin. So what that will do is you're telling Lucidlink, download these files right now, immediately, and write them to the cache immediately. Don't wait for me to play them. So if you do that, it'll say, you got this 3.89 gigs in the cache. Would you like to continue? You hit OK. So unfortunately, at least in the current version of Lucidlink, I don't think there's any real visual feedback about when it may have completed, other than monitoring your download speeds up here. It'd be nice if there was like I know in Dropbox, there's like a little icon that shows when things are being downloaded. But it doesn't matter because you can still be working with it, even if it's on a cloud. I'm not sure how it handles the fact that it's downloading, it's pinning at the same time as you may be accessing it, but it does. So at the point where all the media is locally cached, it'll start responding as if the entire physical file is there, because it is there. And you don't have to do anything. You don't have to relink anything. It's the cache system is just incredibly intelligent, which is what makes Lucidlink so great. You don't really have to care about where files and caches and stuff are being saved, because you shouldn't. You should be spending your time editing, right? That's why Lucidlink is so amazing. It's obviously been designed for the minimal amount of friction for the end user, because the computer should be doing all that. So that's kind of a neat thing. And you can right click and unpin. And so theoretically, you might be inclined to think, well, hell, why didn't I just pin the entire damn thing, right? You could do that. I don't think there's anything stopping you from doing that. However, this is a good time to be getting into the discussion of Lucidlink billing. So if we go to Lucidlink's pricing page, you can see how this works. So this is our current tier, Teams file space. So what the billing is, Lucidlink will charge us $35 a month just to store a terabyte of data on the cloud servers, even if we never access it. That's just the raw capacity charge they charge us. For every terabyte of data, they charge us $35 a month. So there's an additional cost called egress. And egress is IT nerd speak for download. So uploading data to the share is free. Ingress is free. There's no charge for that. Egress, on the other hand, is charged, and it's charged at a rate of 3 cents per gigabyte per month. So if you do the math on that, so for a terabyte of data, let's just say you downloaded the entire 1 terabyte data set, it'll cost an additional $30 just to download that 1 terabyte of data. So $65 a month, which you might think is expensive, but the reality of it is that you're probably not going to have a terabyte of data, although they charge you a minimum of $35 for a terabyte. If you have 100 megabytes in the share, they're still going to charge you $35. So you might as well fill up as much as possible per terabyte. Where they charge you, obviously, in addition to that, is the egress, but it's highly unlikely that you're going to be pulling that much data back down, unless you're going to share the Lucidlink media with a ton of other people and they're all pulling the same amount of data at the same time. That's when this may add up. But for a small work group or a situation where a collaborator only really needs to access a certain set of files, and they're not going to go through every frame of the footage like you might be as an editor, this is really not that big a deal, especially given the trade-off in convenience and efficiency you get as far as moving media around the internet. But that is the reason why you don't want to, go nuts with pinning. Pinning is a useful feature, but I would not abuse the feature because, you're going to get charged. They charge you for egress. So keep that in mind. The great thing about the way Lucidlink works is that it only pulls data down when you need it, at the time you need it. So if you wanted to open this file, and if that was 100 gigabyte, that was like a 2-hour movie or something, and I needed to check one part of the movie for a possible error, and I just went to that part of the movie. Okay, say, okay, cool. You saw it. If you close it, it's not going to cache anymore. It's not going to cache the entire file, assuming you've never pulled it down into the cache yet. So rather than downloading the entire film, it only downloaded those little tiny bits of the file that I needed to see at the moment. That's where the brilliance of this setup is, not only technically, but billing wise. I just saw it here. Only pay for what you use. And that's precisely how it works. So again, pinning is cool when you know for a fact you're going to need the entirety of the media locally. Again, don't abuse it. This is interesting. I'm not sure what this is. Let's see what this is. Copy link. I wonder what that does. Oh, okay. Interesting. Let's try that again. Oh, okay, cool. So what it looks like that feature does is if copy link. Yeah, okay. So what this feature looks like it does is let's just say you're uploading something like that's 100 gigs or something that takes a long time. I think what you can do here is you right click on this, create a copy. It's kind of like a Dropbox sharing thing. You copy the link, okay, and then in Slack or something, you can just paste. Hey, it's like paste to the other person. Say, hey, here's the file that you wanted. Right? You give them this link, which looks like. So this is what the link looks like. This is called a URL scheme on the Mac. You can create these custom URL setups. So any URL you type it into like Safari or something that starts with lucid colon // you can actually launch the app and tell it to do things, which is kind of a really powerful shortcut method to control apps on your computer. But then it'll go, do you want to allow this page to open Lucid app? You hit click allow, and then it opens up that file exactly to that same file for the other person. So that's pretty great because you don't have to do all these cumbersome things of copying paths, and then that person will manually have to drill down and find the path, or even do this deal where you copy and paste paths. Just give them this Lucidlink link and they paste it into their browser or whatever, and Finder will just open it exactly the file you want them to see. So that's kind of a neat feature that I just noticed now as I'm recording this. Okay, so having said all that, there needs to be a little bit of expectation management and knowing some caveats about this system. Again, as I've gone over many times already, that internet speed is obviously the most important aspect of having this work well. If your internet sucks, then this is not going to be as miraculous as I'm making it out to be. And as far as your internet speed versus the performance of Lucidlink, it also depends on the type of footage you're working with. So generally speaking, when you don't want to expect to use this system with camera original files, at least not things that are like R3Ds or ProRes 444, because the bit rates on ProRes 444, I think 444 is like 350, 400 megabits per second for 1080 2398, which is like half of a gigabit download connection. And so even though technically you could probably play a ProRes 444 file in real time on a gigabit connection, that just seems way too iffy for my comfort. So I would never want to rely upon that for performance. But I think where it can really shine is when you're working with ProRes proxy files, because the bit rates of those are so low. And so if you're working with low bitrate stuff and you don't have the fastest internet in the world, this can still work, because the only thing that it would affect is the amount of data that can get cached at any one time. Because I remember showing you opening up that ProRes master of a Taco Bell spot, and even though the bit rate of it was only 145 megabits, it was saturating my download pipe, trying to cache as many frames as possible. So there's like a kind of like a buffer. The lower your download bandwidth, obviously, the less frames per second it can do that. But I think you'd have to have a really, really bad connection for that to really matter. So assuming you're not on dial-up or have a crappy 50 megabit download connection, you should be okay. And then the other thing is, again, I think I mentioned it, that if at all possible, make sure your computer is connected to the internet via a wired Ethernet connection and not Wi-Fi. It's just Wi-Fi is just, especially if you have whatever your default router that your ISP gives you that has Wi-Fi. If you're using that, I pray for your soul, because those are crappy as shit. If you're using your internet through one of those, you're going to get very unreliable performance for things like this. So where at all possible, use a wire to your router. And one thing you got to be careful sometimes also is if you might have Wi-Fi enabled at the same time as your wired Ethernet. See, so like in my case, my Ethernet connection is enabled and I disabled the Wi-Fi, because it is possible to have two network connections active at the same time, pulling from the same internet feed. Some apps don't handle it well, and they may end up defaulting to the Wi-Fi, which is not what you want. So just to eliminate any kind of performance confusion, my advice is to disable Wi-Fi, at least for when you're using network intensive things like this. Okay, so another thing when working with Lucidlink, you want to be mindful of the cache folders or the render cache folders for the apps you're working in. So like in Premiere, go to your scratch disks here. I would make sure that you set your video previews, audio previews to something outside of the Lucidlink share. While it's technically free to upload, obviously that will add to the storage that you use on the Lucidlink cloud share. And for a big project, you may generate 500 gigabytes of cache files. So that for that reason alone, I would recommend not pointing your cache folders to the Lucidlink share. I would keep it outside of it. So in my case, I have in my cache folders in that same cache folder thing, I'll point video previews and audio previews to that folder. So I don't render files to the Lucidlink cache. The other reason is obviously it affects your upload speed performance. If you don't have to do that, then don't do it, because render cache files are expendable, right? I mean, if I open up the project and there's missing render file, I just re-render it. It's no biggie. I think the only exception might be if you're working on a project that is super render intensive and you're not working with like pre-rendered export proxy files or anything like that, then you might want to write back to the Lucidlink share, because if I open that on my side, if you've rendered it on your side, I can open up the project on my side and all the render files will still theoretically be linked. But I think in most cases, it's not worth it. It's just performance-wise, just keep that out of the sync folder. And obviously this has nothing to do with Lucidlink, but as a best practice, autosave should definitely be on a different drive, physical drive, than where your main project file is. Yeah, so if you needed to render this sequence and you render it, it turns green bar on your side. If I open this on my side, it'll be yellow. I mean, it'll complain about missing render files, but who cares, right? Unless it literally takes 20 minutes for this to render because you've put all kinds of crazy plugins or something on it. That would be the only reason to write the cache back. Well, I think the holy grail that Lucidlink kind of brings to reality is the ability to do real-time remote collaboration on projects. So it just so happened that in a very timely coincidence that Adobe came out with the Premiere Productions feature last year, about this time of year last year when the pandemic started. And I think this is really where Lucidlink shines, the combination of the two. So I'm going to go through this process. I've never really used a production. I just only seen it in videos and stuff. So I'm kind of going to go through this in a real-time process and see how this works. Okay, so I'm going to create a new production, go to File, New, Production. And I'm just going to write the production to this SLFH folder just for the sake of the demo. We'd want a more anal folder hierarchy convention when we actually do this in real life. But just for the sake of the demo, since I got that folder, I'll create it there. And I will call this HVCB Test Production. Okay, so I've got the Finder open here. And you can see project locking, collaboration. Yeah, okay, good. It does that by default. Hit create. Okay, so I created this HVCB test production folder. Let's just give it a color so I can easily see it. Looks like it also created cache folders here. Okay, so it created a default production and it's a default project. So I'm going to call this, well, before I get into that, so let me show you what I'm going to do. So this is also an explanation of how you can use Lucidlink, not necessarily to share the media per se, because there are going to be times when you're going to have so much data that it becomes economically infeasible to dump everything to Lucidlink. And it's also like a time deal in terms of how long it takes to upload it. So if you have the time to give everybody who might be working on a huge project, if there's time and budget to give everybody a hard drive that has the same set of media, you can still use Lucidlink in a hybrid sort of setup where you use Lucidlink as the real-time kind of NAS for project files. Kind of like how we separate the projects folder on the NAS on the Evo and then have dailies on a separate share. Similar to that. So you'd use Lucidlink just for the prproj files, any low overhead stuff, but you would keep the bulk of the media local. So that's what I have here. I have this Molokai HVCB footage. So obviously the Premiere Productions paradigm is instead of bins, you create projects. Basically, what used to be bins are now projects in a productions workflow. So whereas in the past, you might have created a bin in your offline project called audio, now you create a separate project for that. Okay, so so we got audio here and I got some proxies. And depending on how many subfolders there are and how you want to organize this footage, what projects you create in the project will depend on that, how you want to organize that. But let's just try to go simple here and I'll just call this, I'll create a folder called Molokai, drag this project in, and I'm going to call this audio. I'm not sure what happens if you have multiple projects that have the same name in a production. So I'm not sure quite yet. So I'm just going to go Molokai. I don't know. I'm not too sure how this works in that regard. So I'm just going to play it safe there. But yeah, as you can see now here in the production, we got a subfolder and we got a project called Audio Molokai. So if I open that folder, okay, well, I'll just import that. Then you can obviously reorganize as you want. So the idea is to keep media within their own projects rather than keeping them all in one giant project that you're editing in. Keep your audio. You can get as granular as you want with that. I'm not sure whether it's possible to be too granular, but you can if you want. But just for the sake of this thing, we'll just do what we have here. Now create a new project in that folder. Oops. That's kind of the neat thing about projects is that if I create a new project, it mirrors it. So I'll call this proxies. Okay. And I created it on the disk. Open that one up and we'll go to the proxies folder. Import that. Okay, so now we can do this. Just move that mag folder out. So you could organize it however you normally would want to do it. So I think this is the nice thing about productions. It doesn't lock you into a form of organization as long as you keep the rules of keeping everything in the production folder and obviously never deleting or touching this file. You should be good. Okay, and just to check collaboration. Okay, so I think by default it enables project locking, which you definitely want. All right, so I'll create a new folder here called offline sequences. Well, obviously we'll figure out the best taxonomy for all this stuff as we start using productions more. This is just off the top of my head. Okay, so you have a folder called offline sequence. We'll create a new project called Molokai offline. And while we're here, I'll also create a new project called Molokai offline archives. So that's another great thing about this workflow is rather than keeping all your previous versions of timelines you may edit, instead of keeping around in the master edit sequence, move it into the separate project file. That way you don't have to keep loading it up and the project won't keep getting bloated the more and more versions you save in it. Because if you never access it, why keep it in the project? So it's a good idea to keep making a separate project for archives. All right, so now you can work. Well, technically, see now my natural inclination was to create a bin called 00 offline, right? Because then I figured, oh, I'm going to have all these sub bins, but you don't have to do that anymore. for the most part with projects. Since this project is now the functional equivalent of a bin, the production panel view is the project now. The bins are projects, separate physical prproj files. So now instead of I don't have to create a 00 offline bin in the Molokai offline project because the project isn't in and of itself a bin, conceptually speaking. So I'll just create a new timeline called Molokai offline 00. Let's give it a good setting here. Okay. So now what you're supposed to be able to do is open up the proxies project here, and it opens up as a separate project. So if you only need stuff from the Molokai proxies, you open up the project. Just like you open up a bin. Yeah, and then just start scrubbing around, dropping stuff in. So now this media is local. Has nothing to do with Lucidlink at this point because all the proxies are on a local drive, not uploaded to Lucidlink. However, the production files are on Lucidlink. Okay, so as long as the location of where the local media is, as long as that path, like the drive name, the path, wherever it's located, as long as you match that across all the systems that will need to collaborate in the Premiere project, the Premiere production, I'm going to keep making that mistake over and over again, the Premiere production, as long as all those paths match, it's kind of like what do they call it? The virtual NAS with the SSDs and the separate partitions that match the NAS. It's that similar concept here. So that's one point of organization and coordination that needs to be done when you do this. But as long as you have that, this system should work fine. So I'm going to load this up on my laptop and see how that works. Okay, so here on my main workstation, I've got the production open, and I've got this Molokai offline project open with the sequence that's in there. Okay, well, let's just say that this is a rough cut I have. Okay. And let's go to my MacBook Pro, which also has Lucidlink on it. Okay, so there you can see Lucidlink right there on my 2015 MacBook Pro. Super ancient. I'll open up Premiere. Now let's open up the production. So if you're opening it up, the production for the first time, it won't show up here. You'd have to click Browse and then point it to the folder, the production folder that contains this prod set file. And then Premiere will then add it to this recent. I already did that before, so all I have to do now is click Open. And there we go. We got the production. So again, this production is living in the Lucidlink share. Here it is right here. And then all the associated prproj files are also there too. Okay, so here's my main workstation here, and here's the laptop. So if I open up these, so you can see what's going on here is the proxies Molokai project and Molokai offline projects have this red lock on them because I already have them open for read-write access. So I can still open the sequence, but you can see it's read-only. Say, same sequence. It's got the lock on it, but you can see that the project is locked by Mel at home, which is this computer. But you can see these projects are not open anywhere. So I'm free to open these projects on my side. So let me open up Audio Molokai. So now you can see on my main workstation here, you can see that Mel MVP for MacBook Pro has the Audio Molokai project open. So right now I can be adding more audio files to this project or anything, which is cool because if you have an editorial assistant, you can have them pulling selects in a different project or organizing media, all while you are working in the main project file here. And because all the media lives in a different project than your actual editorial sequence project, there's no worry about collisions or anything like that because all the timeline is doing. So if you go, they're being linked to the other projects in the production. So if you right click on a clip here and you go reveal in project, See, it opens up the Proxies Molokai project. So even if this is closed, let's close that. Save it. Let's do that again. It automatically opens that project as if it was a bin. So it's kind of cool. So let's close this project, Proxies Molokai. So now, because it's hollow, it means it's completely open for anybody to open. And then when I save the project, and I go back here, you can also see that the other person can see that it's open. Then if I open it up on my side, now I have access to it. I have exclusive control over that project. Close the project. Open this up on my side. Okay, then you see that it syncs up. So if you're working on a project and you have an editorial assistant helping you sort out proxies and pulling selects in this project, but you want to actually add new things to that, but you can see that that person has an exclusive lock on that project. You can still open it in read-only mode, but in order for you to write new things to that, so you can't even create a bin, it's grayed out because it's locked. So you just, send a Slack to the person or whatever and tell them, hey, can you release the lock on Proxies Molokai? Can you close that so I can add some stuff to it? And that person will go, okay, it's now open. I can open it up. Oh, there's a lock here. So, okay. So I already had that project open on the side in read-only mode. So even though the other person released the lock on their end, I still have it locked here. It's still in read-only mode because of this lock. So if you right-click on it and then go read-write mode, then now I have access to it with the green pen. And then now you see on the other person's computer, they see that I have exclusive write access to that. So now I can go ahead and add stuff to it and whatever, add a bunch of new media to that bin. So all the while, anybody else can be working on any other project that they can have read-write access to. So now that I've saved that, so if I go back to here, if I open up Proxies Molokai on the other computer, so what you're seeing now is that this is not linking because I don't have that media locally. So if that was on the Lucidlink share, it would show up. It would show up without any missing media. But because this media is outside of the Lucidlink folder, it's not finding it. But that's the thing about the hybrid workflow. If you keep all your media outside of the Lucidlink folder, it's imperative that everybody who has that same set of media, their hard drive volume is named the same and all the paths match from the root of that volume. That way you won't get any linking issues. So I just go offline all, but at least you can see now that you can see the media that I added on this side is now visible on this side. So even though I can't change anything about this project while the other person has read-write access to it, I can at least still see stuff in it, and I can actually drag out media into other projects. So close this. So let's try to create a new project on the other computer. I'll just call it new project. Let's just call it AE renders. So you can see it created a new project and it instantaneously shows up in the other side. That's all via the Lucidlink share. So it happens that fast. So you can see that for small files like project files, things like that, that aren't gigantic video files, this thing is effectively real time. It's like you're working on a local NAS because the media is so small. It literally, I hate using the word sync because it's not really what's happening. This is not like a Dropbox or a ChronoSync kind of thing. It's a distributed file system, which is another fancy way of saying it's like a network attached storage. Whenever you create something on a NAS, like a Evo NAS, the other person sees it instantaneously because they're seeing the same volume at the same time. So Lucidlink is basically giving you that, except over the internet. So if I create a new project here, I'll call this MoGraphics. Yeah, and again, shows up instantaneously. So it's pretty awesome. So the key to this, you could obviously, like I mentioned, dump all the media related to the project, your Premiere production project. You could just dump it. You obviously don't want to dump it to the production folder. That's one of the cardinal rules of working with Premiere Production. The only thing that should be in this production folder, basically the folder that has this prod set file, the only thing that should be in here is project files, nothing else. Folders and project files. Anything else related to the projects in the productions, they can be anywhere. It doesn't matter. But in this case, you could actually refer to media in the Lucidlink share, which is ideal because when somebody opens up a project on their end on Lucidlink, everything links up. It shows up. No linking errors. So for smaller projects, like motion graphics kind of stuff, anything that doesn't involve, hundreds of gigabytes of data, it may be worth just putting everything on the Lucidlink share because it greatly simplifies the workflow. But let's say in the case of a larger project that's going to have tons and tons of media, even proxies, you may have a terabyte worth of proxies. It seems to me to be a more sensible alternative to do a hybrid workflow where you use Lucidlink as the way to synchronize project files and smaller files, but keep the large media, video files, proxies on a locally attached storage device. So in this case, everything is here on this drive, is locally attached. And as long as everybody else has that same, so you can see this is my computer, local computer. So Mercury Elite Quad, HPCB Molokai. Actually, it'd be in this projects thing here. So as long as the paths, see, the volume name and the path, they all match. So as long as that matches, you could use Lucidlink just as the method of having multi-user collaborative access to the project files, while at the same time it's just linking to local media. And I think that's actually a pretty genius way of working. The only hard part, if you can think of it as a hard thing to do, is that you just need to make sure that everybody who's going to be working on the project adheres to the, obviously the convention of having the local storage have a matching volumes, path names are all the same. If anybody diverts from that, then it kind of screws up the efficiency of the workflow, because if, you have all this media on this volume and then you open up the project file and then you relink to this, it'll still work. But then when I open up the project again on my end, I got to relink to everything on this volume, which is a pain in the butt. This is kind of like the next generation of my virtual NAS method of using ChronoSync and then using these fake SSD partitions that correspond to the names of the volumes on the NAS. It's like taking that to the next level by kind of using that same idea for the big media, but only using Lucid for syncing projects. And that's awesome because you don't have to set up ChronoSync, ChronoAgent. So for people like us who are kind of starting new actually, and don't necessarily have a central NAS, local NAS to have to work off of, this is actually really a good way of doing it. Lucidlink becomes our NAS, if only for project files. And we just make sure that we can have mirrored copies of the big media on a locally attached storage. And we can also use ChronoSync. We can still use ChronoSync for that kind of thing too, just to get it to everybody's computers overnight or something. So even doing that is much more efficient and less time consuming than loading up 3 different hard drives and physically driving to someone's house and dropping it off. It's like so Stone Age when you think about it. Your time is more valuable than driving up to your house just to drop off a bunch of proxies that could easily be delivered over the internet. So I'm really kind of bullish on this workflow. But with all that said, you know me, I am always paranoid and don't trust anything, no matter how much I like it. We need to be sure to adhere to the protocols of good backup and redundancy and fault tolerance when working with our projects. So meaning that it's no different working off of Lucidlink than working locally. If I'm going to be working on a prproj file, see, a production is just a compilation of multiple prproj files. This is no different than working without projects. You're just using the productions panel to manage all these projects. But basically, when it comes down to it, they're just a bunch of project files, old school project files. So that means that you need to be a little bit more diligent, I think, now with productions in making sure that you have projects backing up. And not just backups like ChronoSync. Well, ChronoSync will do it too, but you want to have versioned backups too. You can't just have it overwrite the same file over and over again. You want to have a history of this project file in case you need to revert, because sometimes you won't realize that, oh my God, I deleted all this stuff, and it's 10 versions later. So obviously ProVersioner, which still works even though the Digital Rebellion has discontinued it like 4 years ago at this point, it still works. So use that as as your first tier of security. Just actually, I'm curious to see what happens if you literally just drag in folders. All file. Oh, okay, so you can do that. That's very cool. You can actually do that. So you don't have to go and manually drag in all these things to ProVersion. You just give it a folder, and it'll drill down into those folders and automatically add those project files. So that's nice. So at the very least, you want to do that. You can also set up secondary ChronoSync backups, which I would also recommend doing. You can't be too careful, especially when you're dealing with cloud. Because what happens, and I probably don't want to waste time in this video kind of going through that scenario and trying to figure out a setup for it. But you have to always consider the single point of failure for Lucidlink is the internet. So if your internet goes down, if you can't mount the Lucidlink share, you can't work, because basically none of this stuff is local. It's as if the NAS goes down. You will lose all access to the project files. So that's kind of why I would also recommend a secondary ChronoSync backup, just so you can have like a local copy of everything, at least the production, everything that's in the Lucidlink. And that's kind of also why you don't want to have a ton of big files in the Lucidlink if you're going to do that, because you don't want to be downloading. Is the issue with pinning, right? Remember I mentioned about pinning, about how if you tell it to pin the entire damn project, you're defeating the purpose of Lucidlink, because you get billed for egress. But for small files like that, it's not a big deal. So if at the very least you have local media, if anything, that's probably the best of both worlds. That is the safest way to work with this Lucidlink workflow. You still have the main media on a local drive. It's just the project files are on Lucidlink. So you could literally ChronoSync this entire production folder, ChronoSync it to a local drive. And then if the worst case scenario happens and the internet goes down, as long as you have a ChronoSync backup rule that is periodically backing things up, every 15 minutes or whatever the frequency you think makes sense. Like for me, the more frequent, the better. And the more versions you back up, the better. But at the very least, if the internet goes down, you can at least continue working based on your backup. And then when the internet comes back up, then trying to figure out how to get everything to sync back, that's a whole other issue that I don't want to get into now, because I haven't put a ton of thought into it. But we can do it. It's just because of the way Lucidlink works, we need to kind of rethink the protocol for that. But at least fundamentally, you can see that Lucidlink seems to be like the perfect solution for this kind of work. It gives you the flexibility of working exclusively off Lucidlink and being able to pull media off of it. Or if you wanted to do a hybrid system of using project files or Lucidlink to sync project files, you can do that too. They both work, which is why I like this, because there's no special software other than the Lucidlink software in the background that you never really ever have to touch. There's no special thing you have to do. You work as if you do any other workflow where you have hard drives and SSDs and local NAS shares. There's no difference other than you may have to alter the way you do backups and things like that. So yeah, we just kind of keep banging on this, and we'll find some holes, I'm sure. But as long as we're careful and we're diligent about backups and things like this, I think this is going to work pretty well for doing distributed workflows. And if another pandemic hits, we'll be ready. So go ahead if you want to test this out. Just search for your Lucidlink login. go through the installation process I went through and then mount the drive, or mount the share, and play around with it like I just did and see what you think and see if it works well, depending on your internet, obviously. And you may need to tweak some things, but at least you'll get a feel for how it works on your computer and on your particular internet connection. And hopefully it works great. And if it doesn't, obviously let me know and I'll take a look at it and see if I can tweak it to work better for you. But give it a shot.